All right, so let's go over these 4 homework questions here. So number 1 is graph 3 times the cosine of 4 x minus pi minus 1. Okay, so we need to find the amplitude, which is just the 3. Okay, the period, so that's 2 pi divided by b, so 2 pi divided by 4, so the period here will be pi halves. Okay, and then the phase shift, which is the horizontal shift, right? So this is to the right pi units. Okay, and the vertical shift here is -1, down 1 unit. Okay, so if I want to graph this, okay, so I want to start by making a table of values. Okay, so get my x, get my y. All right, and so we know that the period is pi halves. Okay, so I want to come up with 5 points in between, within a distance of pi halves. So again, I like to start, okay, by plugging in what's going to make this 0. So I like to start at pi, okay, and then if I know my period is pi halves, I'm just going to add pi halves to that. Okay, so pi plus pi halves is 3 pi halves. All right, and then in the middle of that will be 5 pi fourths. And then 9, so then halfway between that, okay, be 9 pi eighths. And then 11 pi eighths. Okay, so when I plug in pi, right, pi minus pi is 0. 4 times 0 is 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. Okay, I plug in 9 pi eighths, I get pi eighths. Okay, times 4 is pi halves. Cosine of pi halves is 0. 0 times 3 is 0. 0 minus 1 is -1. Plug in 5 pi fourths. Okay, so 5 pi fourths minus pi is pi fourths. Okay, times 4 is pi. Cosine of pi is -1. You get -1 times 3 is -3. -3 minus 1 is -4. Plug in 11, oops, there's supposed to be a pi on there. 11 pi eighths. Okay, so now you're going to get 3 pi eighths times 4, which is 3 pi halves. Cosine of 3 pi halves is 0. So 0 minus 1 is -1. And then when I plug in 3 pi halves, I get pi halves times 4, which is 2 pi. Cosine 2 pi is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. So right back to where we started. All right, so now if I plot those points, we know that would be 3 pi halves would be right here. All right, so pi halves were 2. Oops, sorry. Undo. It was on the wrong thing right there. At pi, it's 2. What is going on? Okay. Do this again. At pi, it's 2. right? And then each of these is pi 4. So at 5 pi 4 should be right here. It's -1 or -4. And then 3 pi halves is 2. So you can see here that I'm going to want to go to the left here a little bit. So if I graph this, you're going to get a graph that looks like that. Okay, so it'll go all the way over here. So every pi halves, you can see that it repeats the cycle. So every pi halves, it should be up here at a max of 2. Okay, and then our mins are halfway between that. Okay, so graph should look like that. Hopefully a little bit neater on your end. Okay, and then number 2, yeah, amplitude is 2. Okay, the negative is just a reflection, so we'll take care of that when we're doing our table of values. All right, here the b is 1/2, so my period, okay, 2 pi divided by 1/2 is just 4 pi now, so I'm going to have a period every 4 pi, and I'm going to have a phase shift here to the left pi force, and there is no vertical shift on this one. All right, so when I make my table of values, you can see here that this is counting by pi's here. All right, so in my table of values, I would like to start at negative pi force, so I know I'm going to get it at 0 here. So I've got negative pi force, and then the period is 4 pi, so that's going to go all the way. If I add 4 pi to that, okay, that's going to get me at 3 3/4 pi. Okay, so if I write that as an improper fraction, that is 15 pi force. Okay, halfway between those 2 points, okay, would be 7 pi force. Okay, halfway between those would be 3 pi force. And halfway between that would be 11 pi force. Okay. So I want to find these values. These values are going to give me my maxes, my mins, and my points on the midline. Okay, so if I plug in negative pi force, I get 0. Sine of 0 is 0. 0 times -2 is 0. Plug in 3 pi force. Okay, 3 pi force plus pi force is pi. Okay, times 1/2 is pi halves. Sine of pi halves is 1. 1 times -2 is -2. Plug in 7 pi force. So 7 pi force plus pi force is 2 pi times 1/2 is pi. Sine of pi is 0. 0 times -2 is -2. Okay, plug in 11 pi force. 11 pi force plus pi force is 12 pi force, or 3 pi times the half is 3 pi halves. Sine of 3 pi halves is -1. -1 times -2 is +2. And then this should just be 0 again. So now when I go to plot all these points here, okay, they're just going to be a little bit to the left. Okay, so at negative pi force, it's 0. That's right there. At 3 pi force, it's negative 2. At 7 pi force, it's 0. At 11 pi force, it's 2. And at 15 pi force, it's 0. Okay, so you can see if I graph just one cycle of this, looks something like that. It's kind of sloppy, but you get the idea. Let me erase that up and clean that up a little bit. There we go. All right. Oops. Okay, now same thing here. Okay, cosine of theta minus pi halves plus 2. If you notice here, it's h of theta instead of h of x. Just same thing. Theta is your independent variable. It's your input. Okay, so when I make my table of values, instead of x, y, it's theta y. All right, what's the period here? Well, b is 1, so the period is 2 pi. All right, so right here, I could start at pi halves, okay, and go for 2 pi, but that's going to get me off the graph here. So just to make life a little bit easier, we'll go 0, pi halves, pi, 3 pi halves, and 2 pi. So plug all those in. If I plug in 0, okay, 0 minus pi halves, I get negative pi halves. Okay, so cosine of negative pi halves is 0, and 0 plus 2 is 2. Okay, plug in pi halves, I get 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. Plug in pi, get cosine of 3 pi halves, which is 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. Plug in 3 pi halves, get cosine of pi, which is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 2 is 1. And if I plug in 2 pi, I get cosine of 3 pi halves, which is 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. All right, so I've got these points that I need to graph here, 0, 2, pi halves 3, pi 2, 3 pi halves 1, and 2 pi 0. So you can see here is one cycle. And I could continue to go the other direction as well. So there's my graph. Again, my amplitude here is 1. My phase shift is to the right at pi halves unit. My period is 2 pi, and my vertical shift is up 2. All right, last one, number 4 here. Okay, I've got an amplitude of 4. I've got a period of pi. I've got a phase shift of left to pi force and a vertical shift of up 1. All right, so if I make my table of values, if I plug in negative pi force, and again, my period is pi, so that's going to go all the way up to 3 pi force. All right, so pi force to 3 pi force is my cycle. All right, halfway in between that is pi force. All right. And then 0. And then I get pi halves. All right, so I'm plugging those 5 values there. So if I plug in negative a pi fourths, I get 0 times 2 is 0. Sine of 0 is 0. 0 times 4 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. All right, plug in 0, get 0 plus pi fourths is pi fourths, times 2 is pi halves. Sine of pi halves is 1. 1 times 4 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. Okay, plug in pi fourths, I get pi halves. 2 times pi halves is pi. Sine of pi is 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Plug in pi halves. Pi halves plus 4 is 3 pi fourths. 3 pi fourths times 2 gives me 3 pi halves. Sine of 3 pi halves is negative 1. So I get negative 4 plus 1, which is negative 3. And then 3 pi fourths will give me 1 again. So at negative pi fourths, I'm at 1. At 0, I'm at 5. At pi fourths, I'm at 1. At pi halves, I'm at negative 3. 3 pi fourths, I'm at 1. So you can see one cycle of the graph is going to look like this. All right, and then you can keep going. Okay, every pi fourths, get my new max. All right, and there you go. There's 2 cycles of it. And so again, with the graphing, as you can see on these, when you pick this, I mean, the graph was provided, so you couldn't number it yourself. I probably would have numbered these. Okay, made that go out a little bit further than just pi, so we could see 3 pi halves on the graph. I had to kind of extend my graph there to get it to fit with the numbers. And again, I like just to pick numbers where according to the phase shift, and that's where I like to start. Okay, then I end. Okay, by just figuring out the period, how long it needs to be. Then I cut that in half. I cut that in half. I cut that in half. And then when I plug everything in, the numbers are always going to be those nice points that I need, the max, the mins, and the stuff on the midline. All right, so by starting pretty much at H, okay, and then adding your period to it, and then finding those points, it's a good way to make sure you're getting all the right easy numbers, the critical max, mins, midlines, and then just kind of put it on the graph, and you could repeat the period as many times as you want, okay, while you're graphing.